I'm Nick Hernandez, and you're listening to Community Matters on KZUM. Joining me today is Gallup's chief scientist, Jim Harter. Jim, welcome to the show.
Hi, Nick. Good to be with you today.
Glad you could join us here. This show, what I've done with this is to try to find people that are researching well-being or thinking about well-being, and then to find people who are building community, whether it's building the culture in a workplace or building the sort of sense of community of a city, and trying to build conversation and dialogue between those two groups of people. And the work that's happened with Gallup's well-being construct is phenomenal. So, Jim, I'll let you tell us a little bit about yourself and how this well-being construct came to be and what's inside of it.
Okay. Thanks, Nick. I've been here at Gallup for, I'm going on 30 years now, and the well-being work at Gallup really started with our founder, George Gallup. He had been conducting a number of large-scale studies around the world, really trying to understand what matters in people's lives. In fact, one of the initial studies he did on well-being happened in the late 50s, published in early 60s in a book that he titled The Secrets of a Long Life. And Dr. Gallup studied people who lived to be 95 years of age and older. And I thought there's some real timeless kind of findings in that research. He found that he really wanted to differentiate these folks. He called them the old timers, who lived to be 95 and older, from other folks. And he one of the differentiating factors was they just they moved around a lot in their work. So a lot of them worked until they were about 80 or more, and they moved around a lot. They had jobs that were physically like farming, et cetera, where they just had a lot of movement. Nowadays we call this exercise. But their jobs, they moved around a lot, and they also ate smaller meals. But the other thing that really stuck with me is that they loved their job. They found a great deal of fulfillment from their work. They claim they're highly satisfied in their jobs, and now we call this employee engagement, is really a higher level than satisfaction, but it's really being involved and feeling enthusiastic about your work. And you got to think, with all the research that's come since then, that one element had a lot to do with it, with their longevity, that they found something that was the right fit for them, that utilized their talents, that made them look forward to doing what they do every day. And that's one that's really stuck with me through all of our well-being research. Is probably the one most critical component, is, or at least the most foundational, I guess you could say. It's really having a job that fits. Now that work then kind of took off. Don Clifton, my mentor for 17 years, did a lot of his own well-being research, and I happened to be involved in a lot of that over time. And Gallup just kept accumulating studies on successful, really thriving communities and thriving individuals. And we, in about 2005, 2006, those 2 years combined, we did our first round of what we now call the Gallup World Poll. And this is a poll that encompasses representative samples of 95% of the world's population. And that became another lens, a really massive lens, massively sized lens, in looking at what matters in people's lives and what differentiates people who are thriving from those who are struggling and suffering. And one of the questions we asked, Nick, was, are there elements that really transcend where we live? Our life situations that are really generalizable across different types of lives around the world. And we found there were 5 elements that really differentiate people who are thriving from those that are struggling or suffering in their lives.
Mm-hmm. And those are, let me see if I have these right. Is this purpose, social, financial, community, and physical well-being? That's right.
That's right. And that purpose one you might think of as, if you're in a job right now, it's your career. I like to think of it that our careers really don't end. We just extend them. Let's say we officially retire. We still have a career or a purpose. We just need the people who retire successfully find a continued sense of purpose, where they get up every day and they have something looking forward to doing. So it's really what you do. In our book, we called it career well-being, but purpose is a bit more, again, transfers to a lot more people and situations in terms of, it might be a stay-at-home parent, or it might be someone who's a student or who's retired or whoever it might be. But that concept is really important.
I don't. Does it? This may not even make sense. All right. So say this is like a pie chart, and like, so how much of overall well-being is driven by purpose, social, financial, community, and physical? Is it even possible to think about it like that? Like, so, really, if you're living your best life, then maybe like 30% of it's coming from purpose, 10 from social. Is it possible to think about it like that, or am I making a big stretch?
Oh, it's a great question. I mentioned a little bit ago that the purpose one is kind of very foundational. That if you get that right, it gives you a better chance for the other ones to go right. But you could overstate that, I guess, because when we studied people who had high levels of well-being, we gave them a little quiz. We asked them to take 100 points and distribute those 100 points across the 5 elements according to how important they think they are in their lives. And then we correlated that with how good their lives actually were. Mm. And the people that gave an equal 20 to each of the 5 categories had the most thriving lives. So there is some wisdom in thinking about it from a balanced perspective, in that all 5 are important. There might be differentially important at different stages in our lives. So there's kind of a hierarchy that exists within each one of them. So if you have a job where you're actively disengaged, you better get that fixed. Yeah. If you're physically in a great deal of pain, you need to get that fixed right away. So it isn't like you can delay the physical pain for a good job or whatever it might be. And if you're living in a community where you feel unsafe and where you're fearing for your life on a daily basis, or where you can't get the food and shelter that you need, then you need to take care of that immediately. But the one of the 5 that was the most overlooked was actually community well-being. That was a differentiator between people who have a thriving life, who actually say that their life exceeds their wildest expectations, from people that just have a good life. So it really was a good to great kind of dimension, and the part that moves it from good to great is community involvement. And what that means is, are you involved in your community in a way that's unique for you? Not that we all have to do the same things, but a way of kind of giving back and being involved in a way that's right for you in your current situation in your life. And so for me, that could, I've been through a lot of different stages where, with young kids, I would try to be very involved in their sports and volunteering and all those kinds of things. And now they're a little bit older, and so it's involvement in different ways in the community, and going down to the university and helping out there, or whatever it might be. But I think the key is it's got to be something that gives you a sense of fulfillment, but also gives something back to the community. And that's a really big component.
Wow, that's amazing. I hadn't heard that, but that's really cool. Now
it's overlooked. So it's easy for us nowadays to go home and maybe get to know our neighbors, but not to reach out much beyond that. But if you make it a point to do that, and if you sign yourself up, people will ask you to do things. And that's one that's I should probably also make the point that all 5 of these elements are interdependent. And so being involved in your community isn't just kind of an isolated thing. It's stimulated by, do you have the kind of social relationships that get you involved in the right kinds of things? Do you have a workplace that offers up different community involvement activities that you might not have thought of? Do you integrate community with your physical well-being, community runs, whatever it might be? There's all kinds of opportunities there. So they all are. While they are separate, they're also very much interdependent elements. And some of the best actions actually to improving our well-being involve combining multiple elements together.
Now, so for the upside, to really thrive, we need all of them online, so to say, all 5 cylinders firing. Now, say like one is going really horribly, will it have a corrosive effect and like drain your other 5, or can people get by on 3 or 4? Or
It can. If you're suffering in one, it can certainly bleed over to others and affect other elements. Only just to give you some perspective, it's pretty rare to find people who are thriving in all 5 elements. But even when we looked at our world poll on these topics, we found that only 17% of the world are thriving in 3 or more elements. So that shows you how much of a challenge we have in front of us. We've got a metric here that has a lot of upside to it. And but we think one of the keys is to first identify and put some language around and make people aware about the elements that they can do something about, to influence their lives. And then we need to build a lot of programs around those 5 to make it easy for people to thrive in those 5. So only 17% thriving in 3 or more in the world, 33% in the Americas. So we're a little better, in the U.S. than other parts of the world, but still a lot of room.
And what's the percentage maybe on that are thriving in all 5? Are we?
Last time I looked at that is somewhere around 10%, 9%. I mean, it's pretty low. So it's again a pretty big high bar. That was in the U.S. actually. So if you go worldwide, it gets even lower than that. It's in the single digits.
But it gives a great goal to strive for. I love that. Now, one of the fascinating things that I've actually, my first kind of personal encounter with Gallup was I was in a department and where I worked, and they had us do the Strengths Finder, and it was like, what is this? Where is this coming from? Well, where's the part that tells me what's wrong with me and what I need to do to fix it? And it was it just kind of baffled me, and I have to admit I really didn't have a vocabulary to think about who I am and who the people are around me in positive terms. I have to admit I had a negative mindset and was rather self-critical, and this kind of it was like I guess it was like it set deep and it had this slow ripple effect. And I would say that if that experience had not happened, I would not be talking on the radio about well-being. So huge thanks that goes. Yeah, this goes way back. So tell us about let's see. I see Achiever, Focus, Learner, Relator, and Futuristic are your top 5 strengths. So tell us about your strengths and how they play out through the work that you do.
Well, the Focus and Achiever I think for me work together in that I take on a goal and I usually don't let up until I get it done. Despite a lot of in the world we live in nowadays, there's a lot of potential distractions. But completing my graduate work was an example of that. I worked full time while I did that, and I just kept going. I felt like I just had to get it done, and so those two together kind of helped me, keep taking steps to get there, even though there might be barriers in the way, and you just keep plugging away until you get it done. And in my work now, I've always got a list of projects that we're working on, and the list is pretty long, but we get a lot of things done because we keep focused on it, and there's a lot of opportunities to do other things, but it helps me kind of stay on track. I think the learner kind of complements those in that always doing things that we feel are kind of sort to the things that are most important and that we can learn the most from, and I'm always picking up new information, articles, whatever it might be, to kind of continue to learn and upgrade what I do as a researcher. So as a researcher, I guess in any job, really, there's really no end to learning. I'm 50 now, and I don't think I've stopped learning, and I don't think I will. We find that as people progress through their tenure, they might keep growing in their job, but you never stop really learning and growing if you're doing your work the right kind of way. The Relator, I like to work with people, and I don't like to just do research to do research. I like to do research that I can share with people, and so that's and that impacts people's lives. And So I've always tried to sort to the kinds of projects that give us the best chance of impacting people's lives, in a practical sense. So it isn't just publishing articles, but doing research that people can apply. And so that's been really important to me in my work. So I think that the Relator part kind of comes through there, and also how I do my work. I almost always partner with other people on research projects, because you learn a lot more when you do that, but you also just get a lot more done. So that, and then the future part, I'm always trying to think 5 to 10 years out, and what kind of research we can set up today that will impact people 5 to 10 years down the road. So we've got projects going on all the time that are thinking about the next decade or so, and try to set us up so that we can impact people into the future. And you always have to kind of be flexible as well to adjust things, because times change, technology changes, etc.
Wow.
I've always tried to think about where we're headed and try to stay on track, but also be flexible enough to change course if you really have to. You've got to use judgment as well.
Yeah. Now I know you can't tell us everything in the crystal ball, but what's the future direction of research look like? I know there's been some. I did a most recent thing I did. It was a entrepreneurship strengths finder, and I saw some interesting research on the community part from a partnership with the Knight Foundation and Gallup, the Soul of the Community report, where it was looking at, I believe it was the perception of social offerings, the aesthetics, the natural and created beauty in a community, and the openness, the degree the community welcomes everyone who's there. And so there's just been some beautiful, beautiful work that's done there. How is there, it all seems to connect and reinforce and relate to other pieces of it, and just this great way of looking at the world and how change can happen sort of emerges from reflecting on all that. I have to admit, one of my top strengths is connectedness, so I try to pull it all together.
That's shining through, yep.
And so, as for what you could tell, what should we keep our eyes open for with Gallup, and what the future is going to look like as far as what you guys are researching?
Well, the things you just mentioned are examples of, we've got to touch a lot of different areas to really have an impact, and the future is really about how can you most efficiently have impact. I mean, we've got numbers on what the current state is all over the world. The current state of workplaces. By the way, we're seeing the state of workplaces start to improve a little bit, which is really hard to do in aggregate. So to have impact on an aggregate population, you've got to be touching a lot of areas, and then you also have to identify what are the most efficient paths to get there. And so, like in the workplace, still an area that we need to keep, plugging away on, that we've developed some metrics for and some systems for, is just helping get the right managers in the right jobs so that the engagement of workforces can continue to improve. So in the future, we've got a lot more work to do there. I think we've got a good head start with a few decades worth of research on it, but we still have to keep plugging it into organizations and seeing it, actualize to impact the full kind of economy. So, kind of in a nutshell, it's really about thinking about interventions and how we can quantify the interventions that most efficiently drive growth. We've got a pretty good list of those that work now. That entrepreneurship one that you mentioned is a really big one, because to improve an economy, you've got to identify people with the natural talent to be entrepreneurs and to build business. The economy is so much driven by small businesses growing, and so that's an example of just trying to become more efficient at first knowing what the right talents are to fit those kinds of jobs in our society, but also identifying them and developing those people and partnering them with the right people so that they can most effectively, grow their businesses and improve the economy and improve lives. So like you said, it's all kind of interrelated, but so we have a number of things we're working on to that end. In workplaces, always thinking about how we can make focusing on engaging employees a part of regular discussion and ongoing dialogue throughout the year, and not just an event. So that's always the challenge, to continue to work on that through technology and leveraging technology so that you can again make things as efficient as possible and improve workplace. I keep kind of coming back to workplaces because I think that's kind of that's such an important conduit to improving well-being, because what happens at work connects to what happens at home. And great managers touch so many lives. I'd probably argue that the managerial role is probably the most important in society for that reason, just because of the sheer number of lives that are touched, and the fact that the manager impacts about 70% of the reasons why people become engaged at work, which then affects their well-being.
Wow.
So those are some top-of-mind things. I mean, we've got a long list of R&D projects going on right now, some longer term than others.
Wow, that's amazing. So creating a great culture in the workplace and building a great managerial pool of talent sounds like a real key driver for the well-being of communities, and that is just fascinating. Now, I'm curious about the intersection. Here's my connectedness coming out again. Connectedness between the strengths and the way in which people pursue well-being in the various domains. Maybe, is there research on that, or would you be willing to reflect on just your own personal journey, maybe around the one that you mentioned, building a sense of well-being through involvement with community? Like, how do your strengths play out in that domain?
I think your strengths can play out in any of the domains. We think the one we think of immediately is that purpose or career one, because you have to first kind of know who you are to be able to then align who you are with, a sense of purpose that makes sense and that challenges you, and also is I keep using the word efficiency, but is really an efficient way to use who you are to affect a lot of other people in a positive manner. But the strengths play out in social well-being, because we just have better relationships if we know who we are and we know who other people are, and we're not sitting across the room saying this person should be more like me. But knowing your strengths and your talents, and knowing other people's strengths and talents, just makes this all function better. Whether it's in a marriage or a friendship, or in the workplace, it plays out there as well. Physical, I think it can also play into that, because people. This work is always kind of about trying to figure out what are the kind of easiest ways to get from point A to point B. And so we all want better physical lives. We want more daily energy. For some people, with their strengths, it might mean working out. They really need to work out with other people. It holds them accountable. They get the double boost of having a relationship, a social relationship at the same time that they're working out. For other people, they might like to work out alone, because that gives them the boost. So kind of knowing yourself affects how you go about that physical well-being element. Community as well, knowing what your strengths are and what kinds of things give you the most fulfillment can affect the kinds of community activities you select for yourself, that then affect what you see as most fulfilling, and so I think across all five elements, really, financial as well. Knowing who you are can relate to how you plan your finances, who you partner with to make sure that your finances are about reducing your daily stress and increasing your long-term security. So knowing who you are really affects all five and can make us much more efficient through all five. I know it has for me. I mean, I've always tried to kind of partner with the right people so that I leverage who I am, but also leverage who they are, so that I can affect all five in the best possible way. It's always an ongoing challenge, though. That's part of life. I mean,
now if
we're always challenged. Go ahead, Nick.
Oh, I was going to say, if people would like to find out more about Gallup's perspectives on where well-being, where would you send them?
We have a lot of information on our website, Gallup.com, that on an ongoing stream of articles. We're publishing new articles daily on our website, and then you can drill down within the website into strengths or engagement or well-being or whatever area interests you. So we catalog it all there, and then I can also give you ideas about books that might be useful to you, or that'd be the first place I'd go, would be Gallup.com.
Well, today's guest on Community Matters has been Jim Harter, Gallup's chief scientist. I'm your host, Nick Hernandez. Join us next week. We'll be talking with the director of Kaneko from Omaha, where they build creativity. Jim, thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Good being with you today.